assembly and asks the Buddha a series of questions. Comprising half the sutra, this second chapter introduces us to the transformation of vision whereby external or internal worlds are seen as nothing but perceptions of our own mind. Although some commentators see this chapter as dealing with a series of unrelated topics, each section leads to the next in orderly progression, albeit a progression that might make more sense to a practitioner than to a student of philosophy. My translation of this and the remaining chapters is based on the Chinese translation of Gunabhadra. For those passages where I have preferred the translation of Bodhiruchi or Shikshananda or the Sanskrit, I have mentioned this in my notes. 1 Section I. This marks the beginning of what most scholars think was the original form of the sutra. In order to avoid repetition, I have omitted the initial paragraph of Gunabhadra's translation, which is substantially the same as the initial paragraph of Bodhiruchi's and Shikshananda's translations and the Sanskrit in Chapter 1. 2. Requesting instruction involves expressing reverence with the body, the mouth, and the mind. In this case, the Buddha helps Mahamedi make such a request. 3. I have preferred Bodhiruchi's reading of the last 2 lines of this verse and also of the following 3 verses. 4. In this first series of verses, Mahamedi presents his understanding of the Buddha's teaching as well as his own attainment. The world refers to the stage we clothe with reality in order for our mind play to have some credence. In light of the Buddha's wisdom, it does not exist. In light of the Buddha's compassion, it does not exist. 5. Worldly things are produced by the magician of the mind to decorate the stage on which the play of life and death is performed. They include those that are intangible as well as those that are tangible. The compound mind and consciousness, or citta-vijnana, is used in this sutra to refer to the 8 forms of consciousness, with citta referring to the alaya vijnana, or repository consciousness, and vijnana referring to the remaining 7, which include the will, or self-consciousness, conceptual consciousness, which takes the will as its organ and the following 5 as its object, and the different forms of sensory consciousness. 6. Shikshananda and the Sanskrit follow this verse with 2 verses that are not present in Gunabhadra or Bodhiruchi. His dharma body is a phantom / what is there to praise / knowing nothing exists or arises / this is what we praise in Buddhas. The Buddha is not an object of sensation / to see no names is to see the Buddha / in regard to Shakyamuni / how can praise or blame be apt. 7. Gunabhadra expands this verse into 6 lines. I followed Bodhiruchi, Shikshananda, and the Sanskrit, all of which render it in 4. Unlike Hinayana Buddhists, who see nirvana as the final goal of practice, Mahayana Buddhists see it as a higher form of delusion still involving the dualities of subject and object, existence and non-existence. These initial verses, although spoken by Mahamedi, refer to the view from a Buddha's perspective, a view in which Mahamedi is well versed but which he has yet to experience for himself. 8. An understanding of the doctrine of non-arising is associated with the 8th stage of the Bodhisattva path. The problem with arising, or ceasing, is that it divides the past, or future, from the present. It designates states of existence and non-existence. 9. Section 2. This section presents what is essentially a Buddhist catechism, or list of topics that would have been studied at a Buddhist vihara or academy during the period when this text was compiled, albeit a list representing all levels of knowledge, from the most rudimentary to the most advanced. Some commentators have tried to see an order in the list, but I'm of the opinion it is merely an example of the way the repository consciousness works. You never know what seed is going to sprout next. After listening to Mahamedi's questions in verses 450, the Buddha repeats them in verses 50-90. However, he does not repeat them all and even adds a few of his own, as if in anticipation of questions that might have been asked but weren't. In any case, these questions are merely fodder for the Buddha's teaching in section 3. 10. The number 108 was often used to refer to any large number. Mahamedi's questions do not, in fact, total 108. Some commentators wonder if this suggests that we don't have them all, that some were deleted over time. Even if we don't have them all, I think we have enough. 11. The personal experience of that realm which is free from projection, free from subject and object, is the sutra's underlying teaching and will be referred to repeatedly. Thus, the following series of questions, which range from the mundane to the transcendent, are answered before they are asked. Self-realization can begin anywhere, with any thought. And why not this very thought? Curiously, in his commentary on the Lankavatara, written after working on Shikshananda's rough draft, Fatsung notes that the 36,000 stanza version of the text, of which we have no other information, included a chapter devoted to explaining these 108 questions. But given the Buddha's answers to these questions, I would think any further explanation would be irrelevant, if not misguided. 12. The lands in which Buddhas appear and teach are meant here, and attributes refer to the 32 physical attributes of every Buddha. Throughout this sutra, the term other paths refers to non-Buddhist teachings. 13. The 10 stages of the Bodhisattva path are meant here. As for freedom from projections, nirabhasa has often been translated as imageless. Monier-Williams' definition is non-erroneous appearance. But the usage of this term in the Lankavatara concerns the absence of self-generated images or appearances. Hence, I have usually translated this term as freedom from projections or projectionlessness. Mahamati anticipates the qualifying condition of self-realization. Only when one is free of the projections of the mind can one apprehend what is real. Gunabhadra adds an extra line here, what does freedom from projection mean? But no other addition follows suit. 14. Jnaputra meaning son of the victor is used synonymously with bodhisattva. 15. The 3 paths normally include the 2 lesser paths of the Hinayana, namely those of the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, and the greater path of the Mahayana walked by bodhisattvas. However, in section LXVI of the sutra, the Buddha says there is one path for gods and Baitrama, one for Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, and one for Tathagatas. After the last line, Gunabhadra alone adds, would you please explain? 16. What the Buddha criticizes in the sutra is the belief in the reality of cause and effect, not the operation of cause and effect. 17. Meditations aimed at transcending the 3 realms and entering the formless realm were practiced by Hinayana and Mahayana monks as well as by followers of other paths. Usually 4 formless meditations are listed: meditation on limitless space, limitless consciousness, nothingness, and neither perception nor non-perception. Complete cessation of perception, to which the last 2 of these meditations refer, was one of many descriptions of nirvana, which was the goal of Hinayana practitioners. 18. The 10 stages of the Bodhisattva path are meant here. 19. The 3 realms of desire, form, and formlessness. If people leave these behind, how do they become bodhisattvas? 20. The Buddha distinguishes 8 forms of consciousness, the basic 5, visual, auditory, olfactory, gustatory, and tactile, along with conceptual consciousness, manovijnana, self-consciousness or will, manas, and repository or storehouse consciousness, alayavijnana, which is sometimes referred to in the sutras simply as mind. 21. The Sanskrit word gotra refers to membership in an ethnic, familial, or religious group, and the word is usually translated family, lineage, etc. Here, it also refers to the potential for spiritual advancement, while agotra, no lineage, refers to the absence of such potential among those who are spiritually barren, such as akantikas. For more on this, see sections XX and XXII. 22. Views of life and death in terms of something that lasts forever or the end of all that exists were the 2 extremes that Buddhism's middle way sought to avoid. 23. In the centuries following the Buddha's nirvana, his followers established dozens of sects. Here, though, the Sanskrit specifies the Nayika, who didn't appear as a sect until the 2nd century and who otherwise refer to non-Buddhist proponents of logic. 24. Akashana is the shortest imaginable period of time. Not only can the question about a womb be read as a conundrum, which comes first, the baby or the womb, it can also be read as referring to the Tathagatagarbha, womb of Buddhas, or the Alayavijnana, repository consciousness. 25 The world is said to shake upon the birth of a Buddha. Hence, Mahamedi wonders why it no longer shakes. Is the Buddha not still a Buddha? 26 As noted earlier, Gandharvas are celestial musicians who live in the sky. Hence, a city of Gandharvas was a common metaphor for an illusion, in this case, one based on the shape of clouds. 27 The Sanskrit is Bodhyangani. There are 7, perception of the true, perception of the false, zeal, joy, transcendence, remembrance, and renunciation. 28 The Sanskrit is Bodhipaksh. There are 37, 7 of which are the above-mentioned aids. 29 A flower we see in the sky isn't real. More likely it's the result of a cataract. Thus, the flower neither comes into existence as a flower nor does it cease to exist as the image of a flower. 30 For this line, Gunabhadra has who gets free from projection, but no other version agrees. Gunabhadra, however, does have this line in the next verse. 31 The world beyond projection is suchness, the sky as opposed to a flower in the sky. Among the examples of Tathata, or suchness, are the undifferentiated mind, Buddha nature, the Dharma body, the Tathagata Garbha, reality itself, the Dharma realm, and Dharma nature. As for divisions of the mind, the Lankavatara mentions 8 kinds of consciousness. The 6 paramithas, or means to the other shore, include charity, morality, forbearance, zeal, meditation, and wisdom, to which skillful means, vows, strength, and knowledge were later added to make 10. 32 Bodhirakai omits this line, while Shikshananda has how does one attain freedom from projection. Suzuki renders the Sanskrit as what is the state of imagelessness. 33 Most accounts of the Bodhisattva path list 10 stages. The projectionless realm, which is free from subject and object, is associated with the 8th stage. Due to the obstruction of passion, ordinary people see a self in beings. And due to the obstruction of knowledge, Hinayana practitioners see a self in dharmas. 34 According to the Buddha's contemporaries, it was Brahma who created language and also the variations among beings. 35 Chakravartins, will-turning kings, are those whose accumulated merit results in a birth in which they have the option of becoming a Buddha or ruling the world. 36 In the first line, instead of liberation, Sanskrit texts have vidyasthana, fields of knowledge, but no Chinese text agrees. 37 The Sanskrit has Jataka, referring to the literary genre in which the previous lives of Shakyamuni were recorded. Some texts recount as many as 500 previous lives. 38 The term Mara, or demon, is used for those who obstruct other beings from understanding the Dharma or who cause chaos, illness, and death in the world. During the Buddha's time, there were said to be 96 heterodox paths. The reference can also be taken in the pejorative sense as equivalent to heretics. 39 According to the Yogacara conception, there are 3 modes of svabhava, or reality, imagined, dependent, and perfected. 40 The Sanskrit omits the first 2 lines, although they are present in all 3 Chinese translations. Since Mahamedi has already asked about how many kinds of consciousness in verse 20, here he is probably referring to the varieties of mental dharmas that formed the basis of Abhidharma. 41 The Sanskrit is Prajanapti Matra. This Yogacara concept means that whatever we might say exists only exists as a verbal convention or designation. What is real cannot be designated or indicated because it includes the finger and the one doing the pointing. 42 The Sanskrit combines the last 2 lines into one and for the 4th line has, tell me, Lord, about the 3 realms. 43 This line is missing in Gunabhadra, and replaced by a repetition of the 4th line, but present in all other editions. The Sanskrit is Siddhasarthi, mind charioteer, where Sarthi also means guide. 44 Apparently in the sense of ritually observe. The Sanskrit is Grahana. In India the year was divided into 6 2-month seasons. 45 Ekantikas are those so immersed in pleasure, they are incapable of understanding the Dharma. Thus, they are said to lack the ability to become Buddhas. 46 androgynes are neither male nor female, though they can appear as either. 47 For the third and fourth lines, Suzuki, following the Sanskrit, has, how many exercises are there / and how are men kept abiding in them? 48 Buddhists list 5 realms of rebirth, gods, humans, animals, sinners or demons in hell, and hungry ghosts. To these, a sixth is sometime added, namely, that of Asuras, ex-gods who make war on other gods. 49 For the last 2 lines, the Sanskrit has, how does one become a lord of wealth, tell me, you who art like the sky. 50 The Buddha was born into the Shakya clan, and his name, Shakyamuni, meant sage of the Shakyas. His entire clan was exterminated during a war while he was still alive. King Ikshvaku was the earliest known ruler of India. His name means sugar cane, and one story has him arising from the stalk of such a plant as a baby. Some Buddhists and Jains trace the founders of their lineages back to Ikshvaku. The ascetic referred to was apparently one of the teachers Shakyamuni met prior to becoming a Buddha. Perhaps it was the one who taught that liberation required depriving the body of sustenance. Both Gunabhadra and Bodhiruchi render this verse in 6 lines. The Sanskrit for the last 2 lines is obscure. In line 3, if Durgapata is a mistake for Durgatapas, then it might be rendered, who was the ascetic Durgatapas / and how did he prevail? See also verse 84 in this section. 51 Hinayana Buddhists believed there was only one Buddha for each epoch and world, although they acknowledged that each Buddha could manifest apparitions in other worlds. Mahayana Buddhists hold that there are countless Buddhas, both in time and space. 52 The sutra devotes its final chapter to encouraging practitioners to refrain from eating meat. Eating meat was not proscribed by the precepts adhered to by monks and nuns, if only because they begged for their food and had to eat whatever they were given. However, eating the meat of elephants, horses, lions, and humans was proscribed, apparently as a sumptuary restriction. In any case, the precepts do proscribe the killing of living creatures or being responsible for their deaths. 53 Mount Sumeru is at the center of each world, and its height is beyond any known measure. Gunabhadra compresses this verse, and also the next into 3 lines. I followed Shikshananda in my order of lines for this verse and also for the next 2. 54 The swastika, or Srivatsa, was an ancient cruciform symbol similar in meaning to the yin-yang symbol of China as representing the cycle of change among the different forces of creation. 55 Indra, or Chakra, is the creator of the world. His palace includes a net of jewels, each of which reflects all the other jewels. 56 At the end of this, Gunabhadra adds, like this and countless other shapes. 57 Gunabhadra alone presents 4 Buddhas here. The Bodhiruchi, Shikshananda, and Sanskrit texts have the first 2, Nirmanika Buddha and Buddha Vipakaja, and a third that reads as a combination of Gunabhadra's third and fourth, Tathata Jnanabuddha, a Buddha who knows suchness. When Buddhists first developed their theories of a Buddha's different bodies, some considered a 4-body version before finally settling on 3 bodies. Perhaps the difference in texts here reflects that development. But compare this with section 14, where Gunabhadra also has 3. 58 The 3 realms include the realm of desire, in which there are either 5 or 6 kinds of existence, the realm of form, in which there are 4 heavens, and the formless realm, in which there are also 4 heavens or levels. It was in the highest heaven of the 3 realms that the Buddha attained enlightenment and also that he later entered nirvana. 59 Shugata is another epithet for a Buddha. It means well gone. 60 Hinayana and Mahayana texts give different accounts of the length of time the Dharma will be taught and understood. But both agree that such understanding will eventually come to an end. 61 The Sanskrit is Siddha and Tat, for which see section LANy. This term was used in logic to denote a conclusion based on reasoning and example. But here and elsewhere in the Lankavatara, it refers to a spiritual conclusion that transcends logic. Code of Ethics is a translation for Vinaya. 62 Again, the text has Jnaputra, sons of victors, for bodhisattvas. 63 The transformation of one's awareness from the imagined, fabricated world of projections to a perfected view devoid of projections is one of the basic teachings of the Yogacara. However, in this sutra such a view is considered provisional. The Sanskrit is Nirabhasashita. 64 The five higher powers include distant vision and hearing, bodily transport, telepathy, and knowledge of past lives. The transcendent powers refer to those essential to progress on the bodhisattva path, such as awareness of the illusory nature of the self. Before the Mahayana developed a 10-stage path, early Buddhists saw their practice as involving 7 stages, to which the bodhisattva path added 3 more stages. Freedom from projections or false appearances characterizes the 8th, which is essentially the first stage of Buddhahood. 65 The different kinds of Sangha, or spiritual community, include both lay and monastic, which can be further characterized by the dominant form of practice, Zen, Pure Land, Tantric, Vipassana. The Buddha was called the Great Physician because his sermons on spiritual health were often couched in the language of physical health. The last line only appears in Gunabhadra. 66 Krakuchanda and Kanakmuni were the names of the first 2 Buddhas of the present Kalpa. Kashyapa was the third, and Shakyamuni, Mahamuni, was the fourth. The Buddha taught that all Buddhas are one Buddha. 67 Gunabhadra expands the last 2 lines into 4 but without adding anything. I followed Bodhiruchi, Shikshananda, and the Sanskrit. 68 The reference to gender-specific trees is to species that produce fruits resembling men or women. Karitaki and Amali refer here to the fruits of trees, the first of which has a heavenly taste, the second of which never ripens. Kailash is a sacred peak in the Himalayas and remains a center of pilgrimage. The Iron Ring Mountains surround the seas that surround the world. At the center of the world is Mount Sumeru, at the top of which is Diamond Summit. 69 Rishis are seers or shamans and often associated with mountains. Gandharvas are beings that live in the sky. Gunabhadra omits the last line, and Shikshananda expands this verse into 6 lines. I followed Bodhiruchi and the Sanskrit. Mahamati is also referring to their appearance and disappearance in chapter 1. 70 Depending on which text one uses, Mahamati asks somewhere between 104 and 112 questions. In repeating them, however, the Buddha does not list them all and even adds new items to the list. 71 In the context of this verse, noting the absence of self-existence, svabhava, is intended to deny that there is anything that exists or continues to exist in nirvana, in emptiness, from one moment to the next, or from one life to the next. 72 Gunabhadra spreads this over 6 lines. I followed Bodhiruchi, Shikshananda, and the Sanskrit. 73 Asuras are gods who have been expelled from the heavens atop Mount Sumeru and who now make war on the other gods. 74 Buddhist texts list 8 liberations, countless masteries, and 5, or sometimes 6, higher powers. 75 The Sanskrit is nirodha, or extinction of suffering, which is the third of the Buddha's 4 noble truths. The ability to travel as fast as thought is one of the 5 higher powers. There are 7 aids and 37 elements of the path to enlightenment. Among meditations are those of boundless light and boundless purity, and the 5 skandhas represent the constituents of what seems to be the individual. 76 In this case, the mind refers to the 8th consciousness, the will to the 7th, and conceptual consciousness to the 6th. The 5 dharmas include name, appearance, projection, correct knowledge, and suchness. No self refers to no self in persons and no self in dharmas or things. 77 Ekantikas are those whose karmic roots are so impoverished they lack the ability to understand the dharma. The external world is seen as composed of the material elements of earth, water, fire, and wind. The question of whether there was one Buddha or many was a subject of debate among early Buddhists. 78 Proofs, Siddhanta, are formulated on the basis of reason and demonstrated through the use of illustration. Elsewhere in the sutra, Siddhanta is used to refer to spiritual proofs, and in such cases I have translated the word as attainments. Gunabhadra compresses the last two lines into one. 79 Mahamedi asked earlier, how do we pass through the stages? But the Buddha's teaching in this sutra is that stages are provisional and meant to be transcended, if not abandoned. 80 This refers to the overturning or transformation, paravritti, of one's foundation, which occurs as a result of the freedom from projections, nirodha, that accompanies or marks the eighth stage of the bodhisattva path. 81 This last line is missing in Gunabhadra and Shikshananda. 82 The last line is missing in Gunabhadra and Shikshananda. 83 The last two lines are missing in Bodhiruchi. A bow length, dhanu, was an ancient Indian unit of linear measurement equal to about 6 feet. 84 Units of length, capacity, and weight are used here to demonstrate that everything is made of parts and thus does not exist on its own. A pada is a foot in length, and a hasta, or forearm, is 1.5 feet. A krusha is about 2 miles, and 4 kroshas make a yojana, or a day's march for an army, variously measured at around 8 miles. As for the smaller measurements, there are 7 dust motes in a mote of airborne dust, 7 motes of airborne dust in a rabbit hair, 7 rabbit hairs in a sheep hair, 7 sheep hairs in a cow hair, 7 cow hairs in a gnat, 7 gnats in a louse egg, 7 lice eggs in a mustard seed, 7 mustard seeds in a barley grain, and 7 barley grains in a fingerdip. Thus, there are nearly 2 billion dust motes in a fingerdip. 85 The Sanskrit terms here are prastha, quart, and drona. Bushel. 10 bushels is a kurya, 100,000 bushels is a laksha, 1,000,000 bushels is a koti, and 1,000,000,000 is a bimbara. Or vimbara. Gunabhadra spreads this verse over 6 lines. 86 Except for dust motes and mustard seeds, the Sanskrit terms here were also used as units of exchange in the marketplace. Hence, my translations are merely indicative of measurements smaller than a gram. Again, Gunabhadra renders this in 6 lines. 87 Again, the units of the marketplace are meant here, and my use of grams, grains would have been more appropriate, but this would have been confusing following grass grains, ounces, and pounds is simply meant to indicate approximate relationships, with the idea being that since parts make up a whole, they negate the self-existence of the parts and the whole. Gunabhadra's version extends over 6 lines. I followed Bodhiruchi here. 88 In the third line, I followed Bodhiruchi and Shikshananda, who specify dust motes, while Gunabhadra has simply number. All versions render this in 6 lines. In this and the following verse, the Buddha seems to chastise Mahamedi for the limitations of his questions. But then in verse 78 he resumes recounting Mahamedi's questions. 89 Gunabhadra spreads this over 5 lines. 90 The diamond-hard mountain refers to diamond summit atop Mount Sumeru. For the second line, which is missing in Gunabhadra, I've used Bodhiruchi's version. The Sanskrit mrigatrishna, deer thirst, is a standard metaphor for the illusory nature of projections. 91 This entire verse is missing in Gunabhadra.